Good morning, U.S. history students. Today we are going to be doing Notes 4.2, World War II. Your essential question: why was World War II being fought, and what made the United States enter the war? So remember, the very first event of World War II was Germany attacking Poland. So on September 1st, 1939, Germany goes ahead and they invade Poland from the West. Soviet Union, remember, they had made that alliance, and they're also attacking Poland from the east. So Hitler uses his new air force, and he commits this attack that he would call Blitzkrieg. This means lightning war. And so this was all the planes flying over and bombing as much as they could. And this was very successful for Hitler and Nazi Germany during World War II. They were able to storm into these locations and take over. Within a month, Poland would fall. Just 2 days later, remember September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France both declared war on Germany, so we officially are back in another world war. Stalin begins to take over Eastern European countries for the Soviet Union, and Hitler goes ahead and moves north into Norway and Denmark, and by April of 1940, they had fallen as well. The Nazis were able to push the British and the French all the way back to the beaches at Dunkirk. The Nazis had surrounded Britain and France. They had no choice but to abandon the country. So Britain sent over every single available ship that they had to rescue all of the troops that were stranded at the sea. And they ended up saving over 300,000. They had to go across the English Channel here, and they took every boat they could. Okay, so even sailing boats, small boats that they could take across the English Channel, they brought over all the boats they could. These are just some images here of the boats that they were bringing over and the soldiers that were coming over, wading into the water and getting onto these ships. So France does officially fall to Germany as well. Germany has made their way across the continent, across Europe. Italy also declared war on France because Italy was allies with Germany. By June of 1940, France would completely surrender their country over to Germany, and Germany set up a new capital. Within France, there were still people fighting back. There was resistance fighters. They used guerrilla tactics against the Germans. And these are just some pictures of the Nazis walking around in France. This is Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower. So as Germany is spreading across Europe, Italy is going into Africa, and they're spreading across Africa. So remember, they went into Ethiopia. September of 1940, they had continued into Libya and into Egypt. Germany then begins to attack England. So they go across the water and they start attacking. So his plan to take out England was called Operation Sea Lion. In August of 1940, airstrikes against the military targets, the major cities in England like London. They went ahead and they bombed 57 nights in a row. They went over, they bombed their cities like London 57 nights in a row, but London actually never fell. They did not end up beating the British in England. So they would have them on radar, and when they would see the Nazis flying their planes over, they would set off alarms in the city so that people would know this is the Underground in London. That's their subway system. So they would stop all the trains, and then everyone would go down underground, and they would stay there until the bombing was over. This was a way to protect their citizens. So this wasn't a strategy that was successful for the Nazis. So Operation Sea Lion was ultimately a failure. So Hitler decided to go ahead and give up on his plans to defeat England, and instead he was going to turn around and focus on the Soviet Union. So in June of 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union because he wanted the natural resources that were available there. So he broke that non-aggression pact that he had with Stalin. You can see here in this image, he stabbed Stalin in the back and attacked his ally. But what the Nazis failed to realize is when they went over and they were attacking, they were trying to take over the Soviet Union, they were not prepared for the frigidly cold temperatures in the winter. So in case you don't know much about Russia, it's an enormous country, covers over, over 8 time zones. The northernmost part is a frozen tundra. It's very, very cold up there. The temperatures can get to minus 40 degrees, and the Nazis were not prepared. Many of them actually froze to death. So this would take place on the siege of Leningrad. So Leningrad was their capital city at the time. So they went over in September of 1941, the Nazis did, and they began a siege of the city. So they were surrounding the city and trying to take over the city. That means that all the Russian citizens within the city of Leningrad could not go in or out of the city. So they were starting to have to ration their food. They started rationing to 2 slices of bread per day. Millions ended up starving to death and dying, but the city actually never fell. But during that time, 800,000 people, it's about a third of their population, ended up starving to death. So this story does get a little dark, and I'm sorry about that, but this is history. So because all of these families were starving to death, pet owners began swapping their pets with other families nearby to avoid having to eat their own pets. So there wasn't many dogs or cats around because people were eating them. Unfortunately, 2,000 people ended up being arrested after this was over for cannibalism. 586 of them were executed for murdering their victims, and most of the people who were arrested were women. Some of the mothers had to smother their young children in order to feed their older children. If you can imagine, during this time, the mothers were seen as the caregivers. They were the ones that were supposed to feed their families, so it was their job to find the food to be able to help their families survive. So those who gave up were the ones that ended up starving to death, and those who had to commit these horrific acts, they were the ones who were able to help their families survive. Meanwhile, in Asia, there was a forgotten Holocaust that doesn't get talked about very much. So Japan was pretty brutal when they went over into China and they started invading Japan. Their army would kill, torture, and enslaved its conquered people. And actually, 1937 is when this forgotten Holocaust happened. So this was a mass rape and mass killing of civilians, in Nanking, China. So they ended up killing over 300,000 people in just 6 months. Now, this isn't a Holocaust that's really taught in Japan. It's kind of censored in Japan, not really admitted as much as Germany is about their Holocaust. So maybe why it's forgotten a little more than the Holocaust that happened in Europe. So remember, meanwhile, the United States was playing isolationist. We were not getting involved in the war. We said it wasn't our problem. We weren't going to get involved in another European conflict. But in 1941, we were passing pieces of legislation that kind of went against our neutrality acts that we were doing previously. So in 1941, we had the Lend-Lease Act that allowed the sale of war materials to any country that would help protect the United States. And this was in response a year before, in 1940, the United States actually banned the sale of any war materials to Japan in response to Japan's aggression in the Pacific. So the United States didn't agree with Japan going into China, attacking China, taking over Manchuria, going into these territories. And so we decided we weren't going to sell them any more war materials. But we knew that Japan was going to get mad at us for doing that, so we decided to sign this Lend-Lease Act so that we could help out any country that would protect the United States. In August of 1941, we signed the Atlantic Charter. This actually went further. It was an agreement between the United States and England to destroy the Nazis. So we said we were going to help out. Wasn't us officially joining the war, but it was us helping out our ally England to defeat their enemy, the Nazis. And by December of 1941, the United States would have no choice but to get involved in the war. So on December 7th, 1941, Japan did attack our military base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This wasn't a state quite yet, but it was still a United States territory. It was a military base. Our president, FDR, called this the day that will live in infamy. 2,400 people died on this single day. And within a few days, Japan and Germany would declare war on the United States. We would also declare war on Japan and officially join World War II. So these are some aerial shots of Pearl Harbor. This is what it looks like It's in Hawaii. It is a naval base. They came by and they bombed. They dropped torpedoes, which are bombs that can go through the water. And this was a Sunday morning, so most people were not at work. They were not prepared to fight, to battle in any sort of capacity. This map here shows you all the red ships were ships that were sunk. Orange were heavily damaged, and the yellow ones were moderately damaged. So with the attack of the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the U.S. is officially drawn into World War II. Tomorrow we're going to watch a little bit of a video clip from the movie Pearl Harbor that shows you exactly how this went down. We're not going to watch the whole movie, but we are going to watch the attack scene. So go ahead and write a summary, a couple sentences about what you learned in your notes today.